Well, Paul Rogers joins me now. He's a professor of peace studies at the University of Bradford. Thanks ever so much for joining us. Now, you've seen videos showing the bodies of these fighters. Is it the sticking point, trying to identify who they really are?
It certainly is difficult. If they have any kind of identity papers on them, then that is relatively straightforward. Otherwise, if you were going through the DNA analysis route, this is very difficult because you have to have something to compare the samples with. However, it's clear that, surprisingly, the Libyans have been quite successful in determining the identities of quite a number of these, probably primarily through documentation. And as your reporter said, this is causing considerable concern because so many countries from where these people came simply do not want to acknowledge that their own people went to join ISIS-Daesh. And that, I think, is a problem which is going to persist, and one can't see an easy way out for the Libyans in Misrata on this one.
In your studies, is there a precedent for this in previous conflicts, in previous wars, when bodies have been repatriated?
There are many cases where borrowed bodies are successfully repatriated, particularly when you get some sort of peace deal involving both parties. I mean, you look in the case of the Vietnam War, there are even now searches allowed by the Vietnamese for the Americans to try and investigate people who were missing in action, and this can be 30 or more years after the war. The situation in this case is rather different because many of the countries will not acknowledge the number of people who went to fight for this group. Tunisia is probably the case in point. Tunisia has been making slow but steady progress towards much more representative governance. But the reality is you have huge economic difficulties within Tunisia. You have marginalization of large numbers of educated young people, and a small proportion of those will turn to more radical, more extreme movements, including groups like this. But this is not something which the Tunisians obviously would want to acknowledge. There have been reports that as many as 3,000 Tunisians went to fight in Libya alone, part of a much larger number which fought elsewhere in Syria and Iraq. And I think there's a severe embarrassment here, and it stretches across the region because countries do not want to admit that their own nationals are actually going to fight for a group like Daesh. I might say this also extends to Western Europe. Countries like France and Britain find this very difficult to take. But it is, in a sense, an indication of the power of this movement, which may not have gone away, even though it is in retreat at the present time.
So if nobody wants to acknowledge that their nationals went to fight, what does that say for the negotiations that are taking place over the bodies of these fighters? Is anyone turning up to discuss it?
That I don't know. There's a lot of sort of secrecy about this. My guess is that you may find that some countries that for different reasons want to maintain good relations with Libya may agree to some degree of repatriation. But one would hazard a guess that if this is done, and if it, for example, included countries like, well, possibly Niger, Egypt, or even Tunisia, it will be done extremely quietly with an absolute minimum of publicity. Some compromise might be possible, but one doesn't see it happening soon, I'm afraid, given the circumstances which we've described.
Well, Professor Rogers at the University of Bradford, thank you very much.